Okay, here we are. Welcome to the day show. As you can probably see with our background and everything and my yellow shirt, this yellow shirt fails to hide the glory that is within, and so you're going to get a lot of weird effects here with this. But that's okay, huh? Maybe we're just prophesying of future things that are to come. Transfiguration is upon us, huh? Okay, well, we have quite a few people on. How many are on right now?
76.
It's 76 people. That's a good place to start, huh? You know, we've seen a lot of 76s lately.
80.
There was Aretha Franklin that died recently, last week, at 76. My attention was first drawn to it a few weeks ago now, when there was a picture in the newspaper from Bemidji, Minnesota, which is up north, a few hours drive up there. Some of you will remember we had a little prophetic trip up there in 2013, September of 2013. So that was just about 5 years ago now. And but anyway, this newspaper had an interesting picture of a mama duck with 76 ducklings trailing behind her. And I thought, they were crossing the lake, and I thought, that's very interesting. 76, huh? I wonder what that's about. And then 76 has started popping up all over the place. And I know that from August 21st until the U.S. elections here on November 6th is 76 days as well. Some people were pointing that out as well, even on the news, even though they had no idea what in the world this number 76 actually meant. So it seems like we are in some sort of a time of cleansing right now, and I haven't pinned it down exactly what all this is about, but it is interesting. Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit, first of all, about the school, the online school, and hopefully the actual physical in the world schools that we will be setting up in the future. But first of all, the curriculum. The curriculum. One thing I added just this morning to this curriculum was an orientation, which gives the basic purpose. Otherwise, what we call the modules, we have 5 modules that follow the basic pattern in Ephesians chapter 4. First module is the Evangelism Studies. Second is Pastoral Studies. Third is Teacher Studies. Fourth, Prophetic Studies. And the fifth, Apostolic Studies. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But insofar as orientation is concerned, I did this in the last hour. And this is first draft anyway. We may modify this a little bit, of course. Everything will always be modified and updated as we go, and that probably will never end. But here's what I say on the orientation. Essentially, the purpose of the school, our purpose, overall purpose, is to replace existing world cultures with kingdom culture. To replace existing world cultures with kingdom culture. That's really the main overall purpose of the school. So here's what I wrote as far as the orientation is concerned. This is a Bible school, not a liberal arts college. And perhaps I should explain that a little bit further. Most Bible colleges today have been turned into liberal arts colleges. I remember years ago when we were trying to get a physical school started in Port Austin, Michigan. We learned at that time that there were only 2 Bible schools or Bible colleges left in the entire state. They had all been turned into liberal arts colleges in order to succumb to the pressure of the state, and accreditation and all that kind of stuff. When you worry about state accreditation, then you can't really teach the Word. You have to teach whatever the state tells you to teach, or you have to at least modify things according to their standards rather than biblical standards. So probably the first thing I should tell people is that this is a Bible school. This is not an accredited Bible college that is accredited by the educational system, the ungodly educational system of the state. We don't want to have to ask the state permission to teach anything. And certainly if we were to do something like that, if we were to please the state, then every course we would have would require teachers that were accredited and got their education from the state, and that's just not what we're doing. Furthermore, we're not just your ordinary Bible school either. Most Bible schools teach a lot of different subjects, even if they're not liberal arts colleges. And when they do that, we have courses that we want to teach that the world and the church even doesn't know anything about. For instance, we want to teach people if we want to teach people a course on the Feast of Tabernacles, the world would say you have to have somebody with a master's degree from the state who is teaching this course. But who in their right mind would give a teacher a master's degree in Tabernacles studies? It just doesn't happen. And so there are no people that are even qualified by the state to teach the Feast of Tabernacles in that sense, as a course. Well, we're not going to be teaching the courses per se like that, but what we will do is we will be studying specific books of the Bible that will teach these things. And I know that even when I went to Bible college, my impression was that you go and you actually study the Scriptures. You take a book of the Bible and you study the Scriptures. But that is hardly ever done anymore. You really don't learn the Scriptures very well in Bible college. Isn't that strange? You learn a little bit, but if you really want to learn the Scriptures, you have to do it on your own. Because it's not the Bible college that's really going to teach you these things. Well, I want to change that. I want to actually teach the Scriptures so that those who want to learn the Scriptures will be able to say that they want to take these courses because they know they're going to learn the Scriptures. So anyway, okay, this is a Bible school, not a liberal arts college. While there are many other studies that are important, our main purpose is to teach the Scriptures in order to set forth kingdom culture as an alternative to all existing secular, religious, and denominational cultures. In other words, wherever we go around the world, everyone has a different culture. So you have to start where they are, but the whole idea is to bring them into kingdom culture. Now here in America, we don't have kingdom culture here either. In fact, not even in the church is really a kingdom culture. I mean, it is maybe to some degree. Every culture is biblically oriented or kingdom oriented to some degree. But the purpose here is to take people beyond or outside of the culture that they were raised in or that they're used to, whether it's a Hindu or Buddhist or some other form of religion or a national culture or Pentecostal, Baptist, Presbyterian, Catholic culture, whatever it is. All of these believe or tell you that they are the culture that God has instituted. But most of them would kind of look at you with a blank face if you talked about kingdom culture, because most of them are not designed to set up a kingdom. They don't really know a kingdom message. They're starting to get that a little bit, because now more and more, at least here in America, more and more people are wanting to crown Jesus king. And that's good. At least we have that basis. But once you crown him king, what do you do then? And first of all, he's not come yet in the sense of the second coming of Christ. He's still in the process of coming, as it were. And meanwhile, he's coming in us. And so we need to prepare ourselves for kingdom culture, because there's a lot we can do before the actual coming of Christ, or before the actual setting up of the kingdom in the next age. There's a lot that we can do now. And so really everything we do now is preparatory for that time. Okay. It's not our purpose to Americanize anyone, but to teach everyone the laws of the kingdom and the way of life that is righteous in the eyes of God. Understanding kingdom culture requires a complete study of the Scriptures, the law, the prophets, the Psalms, the Gospels, and the epistles. And you can also add the book of Revelation at the end of it as well, if you like. We need to know the whole Scriptures. We need to have a balanced view and a complete view. In order to understand any one part of the kingdom, we really need to know how it integrates with every other part, because the integration or the connection between 2 points is what gives you understanding. Now, kingdom culture is rooted in love, because God is love. And kingdom culture is an expression of His nature. So for this reason, we will start with the first epistle of John, which explores the origins of the kingdom in the first chapters of Genesis. On a practical level, John's epistle explains how the sons of God are begotten and how they grow to maturity. And one of the main themes of John is that you may know. These teachings form the foundations of the kingdom, and they're things that we need to know. And to know means that in order to know, you have to study. And so that's really the purpose of this Bible college. Now, 1 John is not yet in print, but it's in the proofing process. And so my book on my commentary on 1 John should be out by the end of September. So it looks like the last is first. The last book is also the first book of these studies. And by the way, I just finished 1 Corinthians, and that will be the next book that we'll be doing as well. So it's kind of interesting. I'm writing the last books, which are the most foundational for the school. To know the mind of God also requires a study of prophecy, which is to understand history and how history is affected by the judgments of God. To understand God's righteous judgments, one must study the law and see how the prophets interpret and apply the law prophetically. And I might add to that also that we need to understand the New Testament and see how Jesus interpreted and used the law, as well as the Apostle Paul and James and Peter and Jude and John, because they are in essence an extension of the prophets of the Old Testament. And so it has to do with understanding and interpretation and application of the law. For instance, the entire New Testament is really, or the Gospels, is really about how the law was fulfilled in Christ. In other words, how every aspect of the law prophesied about Christ, because prophecy needs to be fulfilled. And so when Jesus fulfilled the law, he was really fulfilling the prophecy of the law. And so it doesn't mean he put it away. It means he actually did it. He was the fulfillment of every sacrifice in the Old Testament and every moral principle and everything was all bound up in Jesus Christ himself. Okay, one must also understand the sovereignty of God, because all of history is directed from his throne. History has a purpose, and God's purpose will be fulfilled in the end. Ephesians 4, verses 7 and then verses 11 to 13. But to each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. And he gave some as apostles, and some as prophets, some as evangelists, and some as pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of service, to the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith, and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. And that's from the New American Standard Bible. And so this is sort of the basis on which our school is being built, or the whole curriculum, and the purpose. Paul states the purpose very well, because it's really about the knowledge of the Son of God. We need to know who he is, and we need to come to maturity until we all come to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. That, of course, is the goal of all things. Now, the purpose of God is to beget sons and to bring them into spiritual maturity by means of the 5 main ministry gifts: evangelists, pastors, teachers, prophets, and apostles. We have taken these 5 ministry gifts as an outline for the courses of Bible study in this school. Each student will learn something about all of the gifts, but in the end, each will have to know his or her particular calling. Our purpose is to equip those who are ministering with a knowledge of the Word, so that each will be more effective in fulfilling his or her calling. So our job is not to determine what anybody's calling is. Our job is to ground people in the Word so that they can fulfill whatever calling they have. And our goal will be to help in any way to develop the spiritual callings and or gifts that they may have, so that they can be sent out not as our slaves or even employees, but because our job is not to create slaves. It is to set people free, and it's to bring people to maturity so that they can do whatever job that God has for them. But in the end, everyone has to be led by the Spirit themselves. In short, this is ministerial training. The bulk of this school will focus on bringing students into a greater knowledge of Jesus Christ and the way of life that he exemplified on the earth. We understand, of course, that Bible study alone is insufficient, for we are all hindered by our culture and traditions, which all contain flaws. In addition, we are all blind to varying degrees from wrong decisions and actions, not only made by us, but also those made by our forefathers. It is our hope that the Holy Spirit will be our guide and will lead us into all truth. And that is essentially what I've written as far as orientation is concerned. Now, any good questions so far? We're monitoring some questions. You do have chat room open? Mm-hmm. Yeah, chat room's open. And so
there's about a 15-second delay between what you're saying and what they hear, so it could take some time for questions to come in.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, okay. Let's show the modules on the screen here so that everybody can read along with me and you can see basically what our current plan is. Now keep in mind that all of this is still developing, and so we will no doubt make some changes as we go. But anyway, the Module 1, Evangelism Studies, I put on here God's Promise to You, which is, of course, our little tract that we put out a month ago. And it's sort of a very basic study. Essentially, Evangelism Study, the whole purpose of Evangelism Study is to show the difference between the Old and New Covenant so that people can evangelize according to the New Covenant rather than the Old Covenant. And that is really a major cultural shift which we're instituting, because most evangelism has been essentially based upon the Old Covenant. They haven't realized what they're doing, and it's not that it's bad, but it's inadequate. It doesn't take into consideration the sovereignty of God, which is the basis of the New Covenant. The Old Covenant is based upon the will of man. The New Covenant is based upon the will of God. And so these are very basic things, which is why the second book is Free Will versus Ownership. We need to study that first so that we understand that the basis of everything is the sovereignty of God. That's where it all starts. That, I believe, is the beginning of all understanding of who God is. And really, this is expressed in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. As a creator, he is sovereign. As a creator, he owns it. When he owns it, he's responsible for it, and the whole plan is directed by him. And God never gave away his sovereignty. He did institute authority, but not sovereignty. So we need to understand through this particular book the difference between sovereignty and authority, and the difference between the will of God and the plan of God. Those are probably the most crucial things to understand if we're going to really understand the rest of Scripture, because everything is in that context. And then, having laid that foundation, then we need to understand restoration of all things. And so we decided let's go with Creation's Jubilee and use that as a main textbook, and followed by the two covenants, and then the study on Hebrews, immigrating from the Old Covenant to the New. The book of Hebrews is a practical guide to show us how the law differs when you look at it through Old Covenant eyes and when you look at it through New Covenant eyes. Okay, so Hebrews is important to know what changes are made when you shift from one covenant to one covenant to another. And so our evangelism studies are really about learning how to evangelize people according to the New Covenant rather than the Old. In a nutshell, people have been evangelizing, street evangelism or preaching the gospel and whatever they do. They've done it from the perspective of asking other people to make a decision to follow Christ. And I'm all for that, and I don't have really any criticism of that. But the evangelist, at least, needs to understand something a little bit deeper. Because if they don't, then they give the impression that somebody's decision is what saved them. No man's decision is what saves them. It's decision of God that saves people. When God draws somebody and somebody responds to it, then they need to understand that their decision is a response to something that God has been doing by His Holy Spirit in the background. It did not begin with us making a decision. That is a response to something God has already done. And He already not only did it in the sense of Christ dying on the cross in the past, but in the more practical sense of His Holy Spirit actually speaking to us and drawing us, causing us to respond to the leading of His Spirit. If we if we just make our decision apart from the Holy Spirit, then we become a religionist. We are not really begotten of God. Just saying. Okay, move on to Module 2, the Pastoral Studies. We're starting with 1 Corinthians because this is really Paul's gospel to the church itself in a practical overall sense. More than any other of Paul's epistles, all of his epistles, or most of his epistles, were to churches. Some, like to Timothy, were directed to individuals. But 1 Corinthians probably gives us the broadest perspective of church life that we have in the New Testament. So it's important, and so we're going to really use 1 Corinthians as a jump-off point. Now, 2 Corinthians could actually be a part 2 of that, but 2 Corinthians is, in my analysis, is really more about the Apostle Paul exercising apostolic authority. And so I put this under Module 5 with the apostolic studies. So we are going to have both 1 and 2 Corinthians, but it's in different layers here. So 1 Corinthians is really about, one of the main things is Paul was dealing with a particular moral problem in the church, and he was urging the pastor and the elders to set up a divine court, or an earthly court actually, but it's a kingdom model court to handle this particular question. And apparently this was new to them. Apparently they had not done so before, and so Paul had to chide them a little bit, like, what is this? Don't you have anybody that's wise enough to handle this? You got to go to a secular court, and get judgments according to a judge that doesn't even really know God, doesn't really know his character, certainly doesn't know the law of God. He only knows the Greek law or the Roman law. And so so we also have then Deuteronomy, the Second Law, which is, of course, that's going to be a very lengthy study. The reason we have this in pastoral studies is because pastors and elders should actually understand biblical law so that they're equipped to set up a court system, a church court, to deal with any moral problems that might come up, particularly moral problems, for the same reason that Paul wrote his letter to the Corinthians. But if people don't know the law, then they're going to judge according to their own understanding, and that could be a problem. And in fact, a lot of churches, they throw away the law, and so they don't even understand the moral principles by which to judge. So people need to have an understanding of the law simply because hardly anybody ever studies it. So anyway, this is something that we need to study in our school. And so right along with 1 Corinthians comes Deuteronomy. You can't avoid Deuteronomy. Next, hearing God's voice. And the reason I have this close to the top is because really anybody who is in any kind of ministry needs to have some training in hearing his voice, spiritual discernment, and just being able to know the will of God and to hear his voice in some way. And of course, this is a subject that really speaks to me because way back, 40 years ago, I tried to be a pastor, and it didn't really work out very well. Excuse me, y'all can hear the motorcycle going by. We don't have a soundproof studio here. But I tried to be a pastor, and it was only after I got booted out that I realized that the purpose of my wilderness experience was to learn how to hear his voice. And that was in 1981, 1982. And so, and then it made me wonder, what was I thinking, trying to be a pastor without hearing his voice? I didn't even know it was possible. All of my prayer was telling God what he had forgotten, or what I thought he ought to do, or what would comfort my flesh. But as time passed, I began to realize that no, prayer is about finding out what he wants to do, what he intends to do, what his will is. And when we finally get the mind of Christ in these things, when we understand what his will is, then we know how to pray, then we know how to do whatever we're supposed to do, and we can be led by the Spirit. But we have to hear his voice and not try to impose our will upon God. And again, this goes also back to the sovereignty of God. If we try to tell God how to run the universe, then we run into the problem that Job had, and that's why God told Job, hey, where were you? When I created all this stuff, do you really think that you have the right to tell me how to run the universe? And so we haven't done any studies on Job, but maybe someday. Anyway, hearing God's voice, very important. And then we get into the laws of the second coming. And the reason for this is partly because it's sort of an introduction into the next module in the teacher and the prophetic studies. But the laws of the second coming give you an introduction to the 3 feast days and how they work on a prophetic level, which relates to the prophetic studies later, but also on a personal level in our relationship with God, how we move through or how we become begotten of God through Passover, and we grow to maturity through Pentecost, and then we become fully born and changed and become the manifested sons of God through the Feast of Tabernacles. And so each of these 3 feasts are really the basic outline of all Bible prophecy, and secondarily also, it's the basis of our relationship with God and how we measure where we are in our trek through the wilderness from Egypt to the Promised Land. So the laws of the second coming are quite foundational teachings, and that really needs to be understood in the pastoral studies. The final 2 that I've rounded this out on is who is a Jew and who is an Israelite. This is sort of a secondary item on the laws of the second coming, because here we need to start removing some traditions of men and stop defining Jews and Israelites according to the flesh. We need to understand the legal aspects or the lawful aspects of some of these terms, because street terminology is not the same as the law dictionary, and the Bible provides a law dictionary essentially. When Paul says in the end of Romans 2, who is a Jew and who is not a Jew, he is talking from the perspective of defining the term by its legal or its lawful definition. And so he talks about it in terms of circumcision of the heart versus circumcision of the flesh. Those who consider themselves to be Jews by race or genealogy were differing from Paul's definition, because Paul says, he brushes aside that whole thing, and he says, no, a Jew, first of all, the word Jew means praise, and so our praise is not of men, but of God. In other words, our Judah status of the tribe of Judah, Jew is short for Judah, by the way, if we're going to be a member of the tribe of Judah, we have to have a circumcision of the heart, not circumcision of the flesh. And here, again, is Old and New Covenant method of interpretation. Because the Old Covenant method is fleshly circumcision, as Paul talks about a lot in the book of Galatians, whereas heart circumcision is the provision of the new covenant. And I might add that in the book of Deuteronomy, when we do the study in Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy is also where you'll find the circumcision of the heart and of the ears. So Moses himself set forth the principles of the new covenant in terms of heart circumcision and circumcising the ears, and also the prophets continue this as well. So this is not something just found in the New Testament. No. The New Testament expounds on it a whole lot more, but Paul particularly was getting his teachings directly out of Moses and Isaiah and Jeremiah and these other places which talked about the new covenant. The only difference is that back in those days under Moses, it was a long time yet before the new covenant was to be fully instituted, and so he focused mostly upon his job, which was to teach the law. And the prophets interpreted it, and the prophets prophesied of the new covenant, like in Jeremiah 31, but they were only prophesying of future things. And so the Apostle Paul comes along and he expounds further with more revelation on these things. So anyway, being an Israelite, of course, is again not a matter of genealogy, although there is that aspect of it, by the way. There is always a fleshly aspect of everything, but the important thing is, if you are justified by faith, if you have a heart circumcision, you are what Paul calls a Jew. That is, you are of the tribe of Judah, and that has implications in biblical law. But you also want to go beyond Judah into being an Israelite. And you have to, at some point, you can be a believer without being an overcomer. You can be a Jacobite without being an Israelite. Remember, Jacob spent two-thirds of his life as a believer, but he was not an Israelite until he was about 98 years old. He lived for 3 Jubilees, and it was only after his second Jubilee, 49 times 2, that he became an Israelite. We need to become Israelites in the same manner. It is not a matter of genealogy. Jacob was not born an Israelite, and neither are we. So there is, we need to be able to understand both of these, genealogical and lawful, I say, but because the law is spiritual, we need to understand both levels at the same time, because then we can compare them. But understand that we can look at it through Old Covenant eyes insofar as genealogy is concerned, or we can look at it through New Covenant eyes insofar as the spiritual law is concerned. The provisions of the law, which Paul says are spiritual. That's Romans 7:14, if I remember. Okay, teacher studies. We start out with Dr. Luke, healing the breaches, because that gives us a basis of understanding the Gospels in general. I wrote the commentary on Luke. There's 8 books on Luke, but I also tied it in with the other Gospels as well. So I used Luke as the basic teaching tool to present a synthesis of all of the Gospels. Anyone who is a Bible teacher needs to know the Gospels and know the storyline in the Gospels. You need to know the purpose of Christ's life and ministry on the earth. You need to know how it prophesied. And anyway, Luke is about healing the breaches as well, because Luke is really Paul's gospel, because Luke was Paul's companion, and so what Luke wrote about was essentially the gospel according to Paul, even though Luke actually was the writer there. And so Luke was a Greek, he was not a Jew. He was a Greek doctor, and he provides the transition or the link between Jews and Greeks. And he shows that the gospel was not just given to a particular ethnic group. It's really a gospel that is universal in its application and universal in presenting citizenships in the kingdom. So everybody has equal citizenship in the kingdom, in other words. And this is really the focal point of Luke's teaching. And it's not just ethnic, one ethnicity versus another, like Jew and Greek. It's also male and female, because Luke does a masterful job in presenting revelation to a man and then revelation to a woman. And you can juxtapose those together in a very interesting way, and you can see what Luke is actually doing. He's presenting a universal gospel with universal appeal, and he's not just writing a book to Jews, nor is he writing a book just to Greeks or Romans or anything like that. He's talking to virtually everybody. So Luke is the most comprehensive gospel in that sense, and so I did the commentary on that, although I quoted extensively from Matthew and John, and to some extent from Mark as well. The second book is Paul's epistle to the saints in Rome. His gospel or epistle to it's not to Romans, it's to saints in Rome. And, they were actually British saints who had been war captives taken from England down to Rome and held captive there, and they lived there. And so he was not really writing to Romans per se, but to the saints in Rome. Nonetheless, this is Paul's main theology book, and it's for anyone to be an effective teacher, we need to understand Paul's theology in the book of Romans. Romans is in two parts, so I have two volumes on it, first 8 chapters and then the last 8 chapters, 16 in all. And what Paul does, he teaches the law first. He teaches what the purpose of the law is in the first few chapters, and then he gets into the imputation of righteousness in chapter 4, and then in chapter 5, he deals with the restoration of all things. That is all based upon the love of God. So when we study this epistle to the Romans, we're going to go back as well to our very introductory book on 1 John, because 1 John is largely about love. And so, but Paul understood this as well, and he devotes a whole chapter to it in chapter 5, the love of God and how God loves us while we are yet sinners, and while we are still his enemies, he died for the ungodly. And that is a pattern that is virtually unknown among men. We, in our flesh, we think it's a virtue to love our friends or family, our neighbor, like that. But who would love an enemy? Who would give your life for an enemy? That is what separates Christianity or divine love from all other forms of human love. So anyway, and then the last half, or chapter 8 or chapter 9, 10, 11 is about the Israel questions, and I don't want to get into it now, but by the time you get into the law, the restoration of all things, love, and the Israel questions and the difference between Jews and Israelites, or between Judah and Israel, the book of Romans has it all. We just need to understand those things because these are such foundational issues. Okay, well, Then I have James to the 12 tribes, faith and its fruit. And the reason I have James in there is because so many people think that Paul and James opposed each other and that they were somehow writing things that were in opposition to each other. Some of the dispensationalists from 100 and 150 years ago actually taught that Paul and James had two different gospels. So they taught this idea of two gospels, which essentially means Jews are saved by works and Gentiles are saved by faith, which I think is rather stupid. Sorry, excuse my language. But I think it's idiotic. Oh, that's even worse. It's just downright horrendous. There are no two gospels. The Apostle Paul, being of the tribe of Benjamin, calls himself a Jew in that sense. And Paul never would have been saved by works. I mean, you read his epistles, and he's not giving a standard to Gentiles that he himself wouldn't follow. It's so stupid. But anyway, in my view anyway, there's only one gospel, there's only one way, only one door, Jesus Christ, new covenant. Jews are not saved by the old covenant and Gentiles saved by the new covenant. Sorry, that's not how it works. But we need to understand how Paul and James' gospels or epistles work together and how they do not contradict each other. They simply approach the subject from different angles, that's all. But if we understand how they both work together, then we have a pretty much of a balanced view on Paul and James. We also have Galatians in there because that's Paul's gospel or his epistle regarding what he calls the distorted gospel, and so this is where the Galatian church was being Judaized essentially, and they were being drawn back into the old covenant, and Paul shows that is not what should be taking place. The problem is that is what has gone on in the last 100 years or more as well in the world, in the church today. Many groups have been drawn back into Judaism, and they think that if you can just be, all you got to do is add Jesus to Judaism, and you're fine. But you can't. You have to have a completely different orientation, because you have to depend upon the new covenant, not the old. And that's the basis of it. And so Paul tells you about that. So not only Hebrews, this goes with Hebrews as well. But Galatians is specifically directed toward correcting this particular problem. And this problem has emerged again in the last 100 years, and it needs to be addressed. People really need to understand the book of Galatians. Okay, and then I threw in a couple of, at the end here, the Genesis book of Psalms, just because teachers also need to have some idea of what the Psalms are teaching, because they are prophetic. That's the third witness in the old scriptures, the law, the prophets, and the Psalms. And by two or three witnesses, all matters are established. And then the biblical meaning of Numbers, just to give some orientation toward how numbers work, the meaning of numbers and gematria and things like that. And that's sort of also a lead-in into the prophetic studies, which is Module 4. Module 4, Secrets of Time, Daniel, and the Revelation. And I think that those three are going to be enough to keep people busy for quite a few months. Secrets of Time, of course, gives you an overall picture from Adam all the way through the kingdom. And then Daniel really takes you from... Daniel and Revelation are two books which each give you first and second half of the long tribulation since the downfall of Jerusalem in 604 BC. Daniel takes you essentially the first 1,260 years, the first 3.5 times, as it were, and then the book of Revelation picks it up from there and gives you an understanding of the last half, which really covers most of church history. And so there's some overlap as well, of course, but Daniel and Revelation should be thought of as book 1 and book 2 of tribulation studies. And if people really understood how the tribulation worked, they wouldn't be futurists. They wouldn't be still looking for a future tribulation. They would be seeing that it has already been upon us, and it's been upon us for a long, long time. This is not a 7-year tribulation. This is a 2,520-year tribulation, which is 7 times 360 years, not just days. And so then finally in Module 5, here we go to 2 Corinthians, because anyone who is in the role of an apostle is acting as a Supreme Court judge or an appeals court judge whenever the church elders hold a hearing or trial in any kind of a moral case. The apostle is there to supposedly to know the law inside and out, and perhaps better than most of the elders do. And so the apostle needs to oversee such a case and either confirm it or make some corrections in any judgment in the church. So that's why I have 2 Corinthians there. And then I put in also lessons from church history. Church history, I've only got 4 volumes, and it just takes you to 325, the Council of Nicaea. I've had a 5th volume almost completely written, which takes you through the end of the century up to the year 400. But that one is yet not in print, and it's not completed yet. Maybe I'll have time to do that in the coming year. But apostles really should know something about not just the law, but also history. And church history can be very important, because church history shows you where the origins of the problems in the church came from. And if you're aware of these problems, then you know essentially the origins of them. And unfortunately there's quite a bit of church history that's being taught that is really not true. Yet it's, you got Dr. Dumbfuzzle and Professor Dimwitty telling you that it's true. But if you actually go back and look at the records, you'll find that they're just blowing steam through their hat. And so it's important to do a little bit of study like that in order to be able to weed out truth from falsehood. There's a lot of false history. There's a lot of fake history going on. And there's even more problem with people misunderstanding or not understanding the significance of certain things that have happened, because they don't understand things such as, let's say, the story of King Saul. Because the story of King Saul in the Old Testament is the story of the church. Saul reigned 40 years, and every year of his life was another was a jubilee cycle in the history of the church. 40 years, 40 jubilees. You can take church history in that way, and you can overlay it on the life of Saul. Wherever something is dated in the life of Saul, look at the year in which this happened, in the year of his reign, and you can then apply that to the Jubilee year or the Jubilee cycle of church history. When you start to correlate King Saul's reign with church history, then it becomes very, very significant, very important, and to me, very fascinating, because it explains so much of what has been going on. Well, then, to look at the end here, practical ministries, teaching, and missions. Well, by the time people finish the school like this, they should also have some practical experience in, say, street evangelism, teaching, maybe even pastoring, possibly, although that probably would be more of a part-time thing. They should know a little bit about everything, because that's what the role of an apostle is. An apostle really has roots in all of the other four. An apostle really needs to have a pretty good grasp of evangelism, pastoring, and teaching, and prophecy as well. And so there's practical stuff that you can learn, more hands-on stuff. And then I also include teaching, because by this time, a person should be trained to be able to teach, not just in general, but also specifically, we're raising up teachers as well. So we need teachers to facilitate the school, and to perhaps go out and do missions work, like going out and teaching at existing churches, maybe helping establish other churches, or maybe just going out as a total pioneer and establishing some church in a remote area, some place where there is none prior to that time. So that basically takes you through the school as far as what we intend to do, what our plan is, what our goal is, the purpose, and what we hope to teach people throughout this. Now, meanwhile, of course, most of you, or many of you, have read a lot of the books already. So, you know, this is not a school where you can't learn any of this unless you go to school. No, we made this available for many years as we've been developing this, and we post everything online so everybody can read all the books online free of charge. We've never wanted to create a bottleneck by putting a price tag on the Word. We want everybody to be able to do these studies, whether they have money or not. You can read them online, but also I send a lot of books for free to various third world countries, just because I know they can't afford it. But if they want to read these things, then I believe that we should do everything in our power to allow them to do so. So I've sent many whole sets of books to countries in Africa and the Philippines and some places in Asia and so on. So, but that's what we've already been doing. Obviously, starting this school is just a new phase of things. We've done this kind of stuff already. We've done a lot already as through the past years. Now, there's two things as well. There's an online school, but in the end, funding permitted, you know, if the Lord allows us to do these things, we want to establish physical schools, particularly in other countries. Online school is much more practical in America, maybe Europe, although there we might run into a language barrier. But there are some places where you just are not going to be able to reach people unless you have a physical location and a school. That, of course, is going to cost quite a bit, because we have to talk about land and buildings and funding teachers and travel and then another problem is that the students, many of the students will not be able to afford tuition. So we can either teach those who can afford it, or in my experience, I've found that most of our friends are poor. And so if we limit it to those who can afford it, we're going to have a very small school. And so I'm trusting that God will provide. And so that's why we're making plans for physical schools around the world. because we are assuming that God will provide at some point, and He's going to have to provide a pretty massive amount of money for all of the things that our vision would entail. But in the end, over and beyond all of that, we have to prepare for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, because no matter what we do in teaching, we can teach, we can point out the Scriptures, but only the Holy Spirit can give a revelation. Until the Word becomes flesh, until the Word becomes a revelation, it's going to only be a doctrine somewhere up in your head. And it's not wrong to learn things and put them in your head, learn the thought process. It's just a soulish process, that's all. And without translating that by a spiritual digestion process, it's not going to become you. But if you want to become the Word made flesh, according to the pattern that Jesus showed us, it's going to require a revelation. In other words, truth has to be more than just a good idea or an opinion. It has to become a revelation to you. And then that is when it gets right into your DNA, and that is what will change your life. That will change your life from within, as opposed to just changing a lifestyle outside. So anyway, that's what we are looking forward to, and I believe that we're coming now into a time here of transition where we are moving up into a whole new paradigm in the world. I believe we're going to soon see a huge outpouring of the Spirit. I believe that God is going to provide a way in which we can set up not only schools and churches around the world, but set up entire communities. Because to me, a church is more than just a place where you learn the Word. It's actually a community where it moves into towns, and then regions, and then whole countries. The Word has to eventually flow from the people up into government. It has to change. Governments have to change. Otherwise, we still end up with oppression and injustice, unrighteous laws, politicians that can be bribed. All these usual things that everybody knows that there's problems in virtually every government around the world. America is no exception to this. In fact, we're probably worse because we have more money, and with more money comes a greater ability to sin. I've always said that I was never rich enough to be a great sinner, but God has His ways of doing things, and some of us don't sin just because we can't afford it. That's why we need to have a change of heart. It's so that when we do have the money to sin, we don't. We use the resources of God as stewards and use it according to kingdom culture and to establish kingdom culture, rather than just another church culture or some other purpose that is a little off target. Well, that's about all that I have right now. Did you want to?
We have some questions.
There's some questions? Okay. Let's do some questions.
Okay. So the first one we got from Tobin Ellis says, "Where's the first physical school location planned?"
Okay, where's the first physical school location planned? Let's see if I can. Yay! Now I can read those things. The physical school location, I think, will probably occur in the Philippines, down in Davao City. That's where we are planning it right now. There are other things in the works that different people have planned or believe that they are called to set up, even in this country. and all that may be, but whatever happens will happen. But as far as our planning is concerned, the Philippines. And secondly, something that has been on my heart for years is Kenya. So, but I have probably 50 or 60 invitations to teach in various churches in Kenya alone. I've kept track of them, and I've just told them, I know I'm called to go there, but not yet. It's not the time yet. And so I put them off for some of them for many years. But I think the Philippines will be the first one. And if that's the first, whatever the first one is, we'll use that sort of as a learning module, a learning situation, and sort of a model for the others. And now every country will have to be a little different because the cultures and the laws are a little different and the situation's different. But my anticipation is the Philippines will be first. Okay.
So the next.
Another question?
Yep. Again, from Tobin Ellis, any plans in curriculum for various smaller booklets such as Wheat and Asses of Pentecost and Barley Overcomers?
Yes, a lot of these smaller booklets will be resources that people can reach for, kind of like a school library. It'll be part of the school library, so that if you want to do more research in a particular topic when you're doing 1 Corinthians or Romans or whatever the case is, you can do further study with these other smaller books. So they will certainly be utilized, and I think what I'm going to do is to post the curriculum online, but I'm going to also post an expanded curriculum where we have not only the books under each module, but we'll also have ABC books that are probably closely related to one of the books that are actually in the school curriculum. So I think if I am conceiving this correctly, I'll be able to take all the books, I think I've got about 95 of them now. I'll be able to take any of them that are not directly in the module. How many do we have in the module here? About 20 or 25 of them maybe. But I'll be able to actually plug in all the other books as a suggested spot under, as subtext, so that we'll actually use all of the books in that sense. It's just a way to organize it for study if you want to actually study these things by topic. Sometimes it's helpful to organize it because a lot of people, frankly, they don't know where to start. And this is the disadvantage of having so many books. It discourages people because they don't know where to start. And so our whole idea is to try to give an orientation as to where to begin, how to do it. And I think that the modules as we have done them right here are probably going to be the best way to organize the study, not only for schools, but also for individuals who want to study, and they don't even have to go to school. They can have their own self-school. In fact, in the end, we depend upon people who are self-motivated. In other words, they have a drive and a desire to learn, and if they have that, nobody really needs to go to school. We have the school and it's all there. I mean, the textbooks are all there. The main purpose of a school is to facilitate questions and discussion groups, which of course is really nice, but it's not absolutely necessary. Another question?
Next one would be
Okay, here.
a recommended key This one is highlighted.
Any recommended key supplementary material from expensive references? Expensive? Or extensive? I don't know. Maybe both. Things like Companion Bible and Alfred Edersheim's works, for example. Recommended key supplementary material. Eventually will probably be, everything just takes time because we're all developing this. But eventually, yeah, I think at the end of each of these modules, or maybe just at the end of the whole thing, I can recommend certain books. But those books, I have most of the books that I quote from, I have them in my library, but I can't obviously send them out. Most of them are in print somewhere, or you can order them online. Amazon has an amazing number of books, but they're not the only ones. There's also others that have used books. Abe Books, as in Abe Lincoln, abebooks.com. You can order any number of used books. They've got tentacles into 30,000 bookstores around the world, and so if you plug in a title, it will do a search of all of these bookstores, and you can then they'll list them normally by cheapest one and on, and you can order books that way. But yeah, I can recommend. In fact, any book that I quote from in my books could be a recommended list of books that you might want to look up. That's one reason why I quote from some of these books, because I want you to know where the material actually came from. I may only have a quote or two, but I guarantee you I've read the whole book, and so I've done a lot of research in the past, and when needed, I can always go to those books and find the quotes and bring them up. But yeah, there are some recommended things, like particularly in church history. I would recommend Eusebius, the Bishop of Caesarea in the early 4th century. That's really the first church history book. Jerome then, in a century later, continued a little church history, and there's of course all sorts of history books that I could recommend. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how many history books I've read. As for other Christian teachings, there's some pretty good ones out there. There's not very many that really come from the perspective that we do. But each one has its niche somewhere. Yeah, we'll work on that. The Companion Bible, of course, you can always go to any Christian bookstore and buy it, or you can go online and order it. The Companion Bible is pretty good, and Edersheim's books are quite good. Of course, they're from the 1800s. Anyway, yeah, we'll give some supplementary references, whether they're expensive or not. We'll give you some eventually here. Let's see. When will the first module start? Well, as far as the online school is concerned, we have to update it now because we've made some changes and improvements and alterations. But basically, anybody can start anytime they want. Just go to our website, and what would they go to?
The URL in the upper left there, godskingdomministries.net. You can go
Okay.
to teachings, books.
Yeah, you can see right above me here, godskingdomministries.net, which is our website.
We'll put it in the live chat as well.
And and just basically you can just start reading the books. They don't have to be read in a particular order, whatever you find most needful at the time. But ultimately, all the textbooks are there, and they're basically, you can read them all for free, everything online. So, but as far as the school is concerned, when will it start? We're still in the process of organizing. I still have to write some test questions for each book, and we have a little bit of technical work to be done to integrate that in on the site. But hopefully within the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to be really fully set up so that we can do this. Now, of course, that only solves the problem for those who have computers and have online access and can actually do the reading. A lot of people, by the way, especially in foreign countries, if they want to do this kind of reading and study, they have to go to an online cafe and they have to pay by the hour. And that's rather expensive for them because not everybody can afford that. And that's where I don't really have any control over that, but that's one reason why we need an actual physical school. But the modules, we haven't had a formal launch yet. We're still in the stage of planning. And in fact, the other day I mentioned that we were going to be having this live stream at 10 a.m. But actually we couldn't do that. We had to postpone it till 2 because 10 a.m. we were actually having about a dozen facilitators and teachers with a conference call online. And so, we could only picture 6 of us at a time, or 6 different pictures. Some were couples. But we're in the process now of organizing this and thinking very seriously about it because we do believe that God is going to provide soon for us to really start to establish this over and beyond the online school. The online school we can do now, and we have been doing it. We tried to get it started a couple of times earlier, some years ago, almost 20 years ago now, and but it was still premature. But I do believe right now we're coming to the place where we're going to bring this into fruition. So it may take a couple of months yet, but you can start reading now, and you can read pretty much any book you want. Look at the module and fill in the blanks. If you find one that you haven't read, go ahead and read it. The only thing that's not posted yet online is 1 John, because that still is in the proofing stage. But again, within a month, that one should be done. But all the others are now posted, including 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Okay, so does a Bible school student simply read the various books in each module, or will there be some sort of teaching from someone like Stephen to coincide with the reading material? Well, right now, it's just about a matter of reading the books, reading the material. We're getting set up now with facilitators and teachers, and now that I'm starting to do more in the way of live stream, we'll be able to do this and to answer more questions, and it won't take the place of the actual school and teachers. That'll be a separate operation, but nonetheless, we're moving in that direction. So I don't know what to say more about that. Let's see, there was something else I wanted to say in that. What was it? Oh, yeah. Last May, I think it was, I was talking about a transition from writing books to doing videos and online live stream. some people probably got the wrong impression. I'm going to continue doing weblogs, and I'll do a lot of teaching in the weblogs, as I have been doing anyway. But my focus, my main focus, is shifting to the area of videos. This is, and I figured that we would do this. The shift would really be pretty much complete after our Tabernacles conference that's coming up in a few weeks. So I sort of gave myself a deadline. I want to finish up the past books, polish them up, get them into print, the things that have already been written in rough, like Corinthians and 1 John. And I figured it would take the rest of the summer here, it'd take a few months to finish that up. And once that was done, then I could lay that to rest. And the curriculum is pretty much complete as far as the main books are concerned. In fact, I have more books than we needed for a curriculum, really. But we're transitioning now, and so I think that after we get back from Branson at the conference in September, then I'll be able to focus more on doing this. I eventually want to do a live stream like about once a week. That's what I want to do. And in between, I want to do certain teachings as well, which then we can edit and then post as videos. And the first major project I want to do is Secrets of Time. That's something that just needs to be done. I need to break that down into bite-sized pieces, and maybe it might take 100 videos, but I don't want the videos to be long. I want them to be 10 to 15 minutes each. So I want to have them in a sequence, but yet distinct teachings, because there's something about that. If you have an hour-long teaching, it's harder to remember what you started with. But if you just have a 10-minute teaching, then you can digest it before you move on to the next meal. So that's sort of the way I'm thinking here with the overall plan, and I hope that works out well, because obviously everything always changes as we go along. It's a bit like a war, All the war plans are suddenly obsolete the moment the war starts. Well, it's kind of with us too. The moment we launch into it, we immediately start to make alterations and changes in order to fit the actual situations. Okay, Wars of the Lord anywhere in curriculum. And when is Wars of the Lord 2 coming out? A feature film and or Netflix series would be great as well. Yeah, that would be. That'd be interesting. But I'm not sure how they would do it. It would be classified under the woo-woo section. But anyway, the Wars of the Lord, I hadn't really thought about it, but if that were to be put part of the curriculum, I would put it into the prophecy section, which would be kind of practical prophecy studies, not studies, but practical prophecy observation. It's sort of, Secrets of Time gives you an overall view from Adam to the present time. But Wars of the Lord takes the present time in the last 35 years, from my experience, and it teaches people basically how to recognize the judgment time cycles in the Scripture and signs and how we learn this and how we learn that. And so it's more of a practical guide to understanding how the Lord speaks in sign language, in numbers, but it's all integrated into the bigger picture as to what God is doing in our time today. In other words, first of all, you got to know what the divine plan is. You need to know that the 40 Jubilees of the church ended in May of 93. The day of Pentecost of 1993, May 30th it was in that year, that was the 40-year reign of Saul. A lot of that everything kind of hinges on that. Or you can take 1986, which was 86 to 87, the 120th Jubilee from Adam. Well, that when you understand the meaning of the numbers and understand how the laws of time correlate, it gives you an idea where you are in history, and that provides the framework for understanding the current events, how things are changing. For instance, the fall or collapse of the Soviet Union in 1987, after 70 years from 1917, things like that. You soon start to get a feel for it, but it's a whole study in itself. But you're probably right. I'll have to pray about it, but I might just add that to Module 4, Secrets of Time, Daniel, Revelation, and the Wars of the Lord. I just might do that. So we'll see. Oh, as for Wars of the Lord 2, well, the first book really ended in September of 2008. After that, we entered into a whole new paradigm of the Elisha ministry. And unfortunately, we're only halfway through that. We've seen the first 8 signs of Elisha take place, and we're waiting really for the last half, the signs number 9 through 16 in the book of 2 Kings. And I don't really want to start writing Wars of the Lord 2 until I see, until we at least get into the second half of the signs of Elisha, because that will alter or color my view of the first 8 signs. And so I'm waiting on that. But my intention is, at this point, is to write a book 2, and the main focus will be the 16 signs of Elisha. So that's the plan. But I can't get started on it yet because we're only halfway through it. Okay?
Do you? We were curious if you wanted to go till like after 3:30, stop taking questions, or if you just want to go as long as questions go, or just how you want to proceed.
We've been going for about an hour and a half now.
Yes.
Well, we can keep going for a little while.
Yeah.
I hate to bore all you folks up there, and some of you have got to get a life, there's stuff to do. I understand that. But let's just keep going for a while and see where we go.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite Bible translation, or you are more eclectic in your choice of Bible translations? Oh, I'm more electric in that. Shocking, isn't it? My favorite Bible translation, I don't really have a favorite Bible translation. I see problems with all of them, but I also see strengths in all of them, or many of them anyway. Normally, of course, what I do, I use my New American Standard. This is something that I have been using. Just not that it's problem-free by any means, but I just wanted. My thought was years ago that when I'm writing these books, I need to put them in modern English rather than King James English. And so I had to pick something. And so I thought, well, this is probably one of the best modern English translations that are easy to understand. I don't want to contend with Old English definitions from King James, or even the Geneva Bible, which is 1599, which precedes King James. It really goes back to 1560. But it's all King James-y types English. Others, you have very literal translations which are good for Bible study, such as the Concordant version. The problem is that the language is quite stilted. It's sort of unnatural. And it makes it difficult for some people to understand if English is not their first language. And it's even difficult for those where the English is your first language. And so I wrestled with that some time ago, and I figured, okay, I'll just use the New American Standard, and then I'll just have to make corrections wherever they get goofed up. And a lot of times they really, really mess up bad. And so they make me mad sometimes, but then I'm sorry, righteous indignation. Yeah. But but it's we have to start somewhere, and ultimately, I don't like to be dependent upon any man's translation. I want to go and find out, what did the author actually mean? And I mean the author on two levels. What did God really mean when he was talking about it? But also, what did the biblical author, that says, such as Ezekiel or Isaiah or Paul, what was on their mind? What were they thinking when they wrote something? And often it is, since words have more than one meaning, translations are not inaccurate the way they render it, but sometimes they don't understand things. They don't understand what the author's talking about. For instance, a lot of translations don't know the difference between begotten and born. The Greek word is goneo, and it means either one. But when it applies to a man, it means to beget. When it applies to a woman, it means to give birth, or having to be born. And so you can translate it either way, and technically it's accurate, but you have to look at the context and you have to see what the author means in order to know how to translate it. Is he talking about the seed from a man, or is he talking about giving birth through a woman? And I am really surprised at how the translators, for all their education, they miss the boat completely on some things. So like the end of 1 Peter 1:23, I think it is, in the New American Standard, it says that we were born again, not by corruptible seed, by incorruptible seed. Well, seed does not give birth. Seed begets. And so here they are, they're mixing their metaphors here. They're talking about seed in terms of being born again. That's not the way you should translate it. You should be begotten, because seed is what begets. It's the male process. Men beget, women give birth, and you shouldn't mix the two. So for all of their intelligence, sometimes they really don't understand what's going on, because they did not understand the message of sonship. So what can I say? Anyway, so I use a number of translations, but the basic one that I use is New American Standard. But don't interpret that to mean that that's my favorite one. I find it the most useful. That's about it. Okay. Once testing is completed, is there going to be certification after courses are completed, both on and offline? Yes. In fact, we have already in the past given certifications, or I guess certification of completion or something like that. I don't know. There's some legal aspects where you can't call it a diploma legally, because the educational department will get mad at you. They've got a monopoly on diplomas. But yes, we will have a piece of paper. It looks real nice. We've already developed that, and we've already given out some. And in fact, even going further, even ordination papers, which is most useful for people who are in prison ministries, and they just need a little piece of paper to get in. But ordination papers and certificates as well, diplomas, whatever you want to call them, they have their value is limited, because we don't have a denomination. Most denominations have a Bible school or two or three where they train people in their image in order to be pastors of their own denominational churches. We don't have a denomination to draw students from, nor do we have churches for anybody to pastor. Okay, you got your graduate, we're going to send you over here, and you'll be the pastor of XYZ church over here in, Podunk Center, Iowa. We don't have that. If anybody is going to do a church or pastor a church or begin a church, for the most part, you're going to have to do it all yourself. It'll be the hard way. You'll probably not be able to inherit an already existing church that somebody else started 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 500 years ago. And that's the thing about non-denominations like that. We have no, we don't intend to control any churches out there and tell them what to teach. We will help them do their ministry. We don't want them to be helping us do our ministry, per se. If they want to help us, that's fine. But our main goal is to help other people. But there are just so few groups that are interested in what we have to offer that we're going to have to create our own groups, our own Bible study groups. And in fact, the books that I have been doing are designed specifically for this. They're designed to be helps for teachers in home Bible studies, but not just home. Some people have been using these books in their Sunday school or Sabbath school teachings, and they use the books and they'll read a paragraph and they'll discuss it, read another paragraph and discuss it, and however long it takes to get through the book, that's how long it takes. But so I do write these books with that in mind, that these can be used as essential guidelines for any context of Bible teaching. So anyway, let's see. Will we be appointed specific teachers to work with during the course so that we can ask questions? Basically, yes. Anybody who wants to join a class, the idea is, as long as we have enough teachers to do this, then yes, we will set up schools, and we'll set up the technical program where people can meet evenings or whatever the schedule is, so that you can meet as a class without having to go to a physical location. That's the online school. And there will be a facilitator or teacher or moderator doing all of this stuff so that you can discuss what you have read in the class assignment in a particular book, and ask questions and integrate what you are learning into the broader context of your overall knowledge of the Scriptures. So yeah, we do intend to do that. And as for teachers, as time passes, we will need more and more teachers, obviously, and so I know right now we've got a core group of a dozen people or so that we're working on this, and people who are planning to and preparing to be teachers and facilitators. Eventually, we're going to need a whole lot more, and those who have already done the reading, those who have already studied, and those who feel called, you're welcome to apply at that time. We're still not quite ready yet. We're still working on the structure, but once we get going, perhaps sometime this next year, depending on the number of students, we'll also need teachers, because each teacher will have a small class, and we'll probably go through the modules here. I don't know yet if we'll have a different teacher for each module. I don't know. I think it depends upon what the teacher himself or herself is comfortable doing. Those are details that yet have to be worked out. But one way or the other, yeah, we're going to get that done. Okay, any live stream introduction to the prayer campaign? I'm intending to write and post a model prayer tomorrow, which is, the prayer campaign begins at 7:22 p.m. That's our time, Central Standard Time. So it's in the evening. So I'll have it posted some hours earlier, if all goes well. but I've already written a number of weblogs on to orient you toward as for the purpose of the prayer campaign. Of course, obviously, it's the Burning Man prayer campaign, but now, as of yesterday, if you saw the weblog from my friend Chai, he from Singapore, he showed that it also overlays on the time of the Hungry Ghost Festival in Taoist and Buddhist traditions in the Far East, China and places like that. And so it's obvious that that's another layer on the prayer campaign. And so, let's see. Anyway, what I've already written about the prayer campaign should probably be considered to be introductory. And I've been, when I first announced it, I didn't really know anything about what this was about. I didn't know the time, I didn't know really anything, but I just knew we were going to have a prayer campaign because that's what the Father said. And so it's been a progressive revelation all the way up to today, and who knows, maybe I'll learn the last things that I need to know tomorrow while I'm writing the model prayer. But as usual, a model prayer is just a model prayer. It's just a focal point to bring us into unity so that these are the things that we are all praying about, the core things we're praying about. Whatever you do, however you are led to pray, in addition to what the model prayer is certainly all welcome and not to be discouraged in the least, because everybody, the main rule of this whole thing is be led by the Spirit. That's really the main rule. And so even though we have a unity and are providing some leadership in this, in the end, we want you to do what you are called to do. And what we're really doing, even in a prayer campaign, is we are facilitating things to help you do what you are led to do. And sometimes it's the revelation of the prayer campaign itself and the timing and things like that, which provides a certain context for you to participate in your own way. Okay. Anything else?
That's the last one right now.
That's pretty much it.
That's all we got.
Okay. Well, let's wrap this up then. I don't want to take any more of your time. It's been real good. A couple hours. It's kind of a long one. I was hoping to get done in an hour, but we actually had quite a bit of material to cover. So anyway, thanks for listening, and we will we'll try to have another live stream sometime the end of September, sometime after the Branson conference. And who knows, if things happen at the Branson conference or whatever, we might need to give a report on that. Since it won't be live streamed, I think that we probably will want to give some sort of report, depending on what transpires there, because you never know. There's always a revelation wherever we go. And so we'll be sharing it. But if not in a live stream, I'll share it certainly in a weblog. One way or the other, we'll share and make sure that you get the info that you need. Okay? All right. God bless. Over and out.